Okay, so let's go. Lesley, Keith, are you there? Sorry.
Yes,
Yes.
Keith is
Okay,
here.
and Okay, great. And Lesley, are you there?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So we will start. Sorry if it will be only the both of you. I hope maybe me, John, or Francis maybe join the conference later. So we will start with the how to create and develop an African creative ecosystem in animation. First of all, can you please introduce yourself? Maybe Lesley, you can start.
Yes, my name is Keith White, CEO and founder of Afro Plus App.
Hi, I'm Lesley Williams. I'm the CEO of Tshimologong Precinct. It's a university-based incubator in Johannesburg, and we focus on visual innovation and specifically the intersection around hardware, software, and content.
Okay, thank you. So the challenges of African animation are multiple: training, quality, production, financing, distribution, dissemination, etc. How to structure and develop this sector with all of these constraints? Maybe Lesley, you can go on.
Sure. I mean, it's quite a mouthful of a question. I think when we look at animation in Africa, sometimes I think that we become very internal focused. And the animation industry is really a transnational industry. So when we are solving to build the industry, we need to keep that in mind. And for me, some of the key, if you like, for me, animation is an innovation system. Come from an innovation background. And when I map the key innovation plays in a South African context anyway, it is government, there's a lot of diplomatic interventions, so cultural diplomacy comes into play. There's the opportunity of where and how we build out the opportunity of aesthetics in animation, specifically African aesthetics. And then looking at our role and the intention we give to building out the value chain from pre-production through to post-production. And we need a solid mapping exercise of who the different stakeholders are, but also like where and how we go about intentionally collaborating. I think there's a lot of opportunity across the continent that we're not finding each other. And for me, that is the issue. And when stakeholders do come forward, it's still, for me, it feels more like competition to be the leading voice than holding hands to look at where and how do we build together. So I'll kick off for that, and I may add more after Keith has contributed.
Yes, I would agree wholeheartedly with what Lesley just said. I'm based here in the United States, but we also run a summit called AfroAnimation that brings animators, Black, Brown, African together, one to know each other. One of the issues that we discovered in putting on our inaugural event this May was there is a huge disconnect. We have heard animators, both in Africa as well as in the US, if they're fortunate enough to get a deal with the Netflix or Disney or another studio, and they have the opportunity to hire diverse talent, we were hearing that they didn't know who these freelancers were, and they would go all the way to Taiwan to find the talent to do Black characters, which makes no sense to me. So I would agree with Lesley that there has to be, I think if you look at the model that Lesley was pointing out in South Africa, where the government has really gotten behind the industry, that does make all the difference in the world. The reason why you're starting to see, for example, some American animation studios, particularly Disney and Netflix, pay attention to or starting to invest somewhat in Africa is because the Black Panther movie showed them that they could find a Black audience and they can create Black content with unique stories that are universally appealing. So to some extent, there needs to be something coming out of Africa that could hit on the international stage and be a hit. because if the government isn't going to back you, then the movie studios who get validation that there are audiences that are interested in these stories and in a mass appeal, then you could get Hollywood movie studios to start to invest more into Africa. So I think that there could be a two-pronged approach.
Okay, thank you very much. So my next question is: African creative talent have one advantage, knowledge of their culture and that of author. And on the use of these assets will depend on their success. What? Oh, okay, no, never mind. So African animation is characterized by a great diversity, means and subject technique. How do you explain that? And how to attract and support young talent into the animation profession?
Yeah, I think, being South African anyway, and I think to a large extent being African, we definitely have the value of understanding multiple cultures. We have been consuming animation from the West for decades, multitudes of decades, and also more recently from Asia, and we all know the success of anime. And so yes, we do understand multiple cultures, but we also have we've become accustomed, just because of our context of working across the complexity of diversity, of cultures, of religions, where it's more than just tolerance, that there is appreciation across diversity, and there's also the nuance and the humor that comes with it. So I think, those stories and those experiences of multiple cultures are definitely valuable, but it's not enough. We can't stop there. We need to blend that with high quality productions accompanying our stories. And we also need to look at what are the different kinds of business models that can bring this together. I think the world has changed dramatically. Well, the world definitely has changed dramatically in the past 2 years. So there is room for new models beyond the animation industry, but we must not be left behind. One of the beauties that I have seen in our space with our animation academy, and later I'll speak more about our other products, but to a large extent, this was the one area of our work that was not really disrupted. In fact, quality, when we had to start working remotely. So yes, the interns, yes, our alumni missed working in the same studio together, but by far and large, it was business as usual. They just worked from home. And in fact, the quality of the productions went up much higher than the year before, and we got an increase of requests for service work. So I think there is opportunities we can build on in line with the rest of the world that's trying to understand this new journey. And I also think that our industry is young enough where we can be far more intentional about how we design it. This morning, one of the speakers said that, Africa needs to be the if you like, the factory for service work. And while I felt a bit of a dis-ease by that description, I think we need to find some sort of balance, because if we say that our stories are a new contribution to the world, we need to start focusing on original content and find that balance between service work that brings in revenue, that creates jobs much faster, and investing in our own. So culture is at the forefront, and we need to learn how to tell our own story and monetize that to be sustainable.
Yes, I would say that now is an interesting time for Africa. In the West, in the United States in particular, folks are kind of tired of the same old stories. And there is an interest in searching out and finding unique stories that are told from a different cultural point of view. And again, as I said earlier, you're starting in a very slow way. It's at its beginning, I feel, where you find the Hollywood studios here in the United States starting to look towards Africa for African-oriented stories that are very different than in the West. A lot of these stories in the West storytelling, are just replayed and replayed and replayed with a different twist. And so I think Africa is a new frontier for new stories that are told by Africans in an African oriented way. I also agree with Lesley that it just cannot be about culture. Obviously, funding to get these productions out is extremely important. The quality of the production has to be something that would be appealing from a global perspective. But I know quality has a lot to do with the amount of production money that you have, whether or not it's 2D or 3D. So I certainly believe right now there is a spotlight on Africa with respect to the unique storytellings that's coming out of Africa. I think if you look at creators like Michaela Cole and Issa Rae, they started with their productions on YouTube, and so they started creating series there. I think Michaela Cole started with one called Chewing Gum, and then she got her deal, I think, ultimately with BBC in HBO for I Might Destroy You, and then she recently, as you know, last week got the Emmy. So just kind of focusing on one distribution channel that may or may not hit for you. There are obviously digital channels that you can exploit to get your creative content out there and to build your audience and to build your brand. So yes, take what you have that is uniquely specific to your storytelling and your culture and your experiences, and try to move with respect to getting your stories, not just pitching the Hollywood studios or the studios within Africa, but also look for digital distribution channels to start to build your audience and your brand, because that's how Issa Rae and others get discovered, because they built enormous audiences, and they're able to eventually get a Hollywood deal. And so I think basically the time is right now for Africa.
So next question is how to attract and support young talent into the animation profession.
In true African style, and I'd like to respond with telling a story first. About 2 years ago, two young boys came into the life of our animation academy. Timothy at that time was 13 years old. Lesley was 12 years old. And the way they got to come to our studio is that we were hosting a school trip for our Fakugeze festival. This is our digital arts festival. And on the school trip, we were hosting a masterclass around the principles of visual development of animation. Timothy and Lesley became super hooked on the Kool-Aid we were offering. I know it sounds bad, it just sounds like a drug, which sounds really bad to say, but they really got hooked on animation on that visit. And they started coming back every single day. It became a bit of a problem because they would leave school early and walk long distances to visit our studio. And we eventually formed a relationship with each of their parents to make sure that they're safe, that they have transport home. But 2 years later, Lesley and Timothy still come to our studio. And they're fantastic. They sit in our classes, our master classes. They draw in the corner. They both use like Wacoms that we have on site. And the whole point I'm trying to make is that we need to expose the young when they are young. When most of our animation schools in South Africa are essentially for the wealthy. And when I speak to kids who go to those schools, they have had a lot of the infrastructure support from a very young age, as teenagers from 12 years old. And for me, part of our focus at Tshimologong Precinct is to make sure that we develop an inclusive animation industry within the country, that we cross over socioeconomic, racial and cultural divides, and we create access points for all. Many of the talent that comes to our place are self-taught. Many of them are graduates of other animation academies where they need to be refined before they go into the studio. But what we have done is that we've constantly engaged with the industry to find out what they want. So with our Animation Academy, we support in pre-production, talent growth, and build the confidence to work on production. So starting from 1 minute up to 10 minutes by the end of the year. We're not going to see feature films if we can't make, or high quality feature films if we can't make high quality short films. We then launched the Studios Collective, and the intention of that was to work with our alumni to do serviced work for others. So as Tshimologong, we will go out and get the work, and we'll subcontract our alumni, and again, help them to build legitimacy in the market as they set up their own studios. The final tool I'll mention is our market readiness program, where we work with Annecy International Animation Festival, or at least we work with Annecy, but we got 5 animation studios pitch ready over the course of a few months to take them to Annecy. But what I am saying, there is multiple interventions. We need to constantly listen to what the market is and quickly innovate and quickly design. But the whole idea is to build confidence and build those specialized skills with the talent.
Sorry. The question was how to attract and support young talents into the animation profession.
Well, I can't necessarily speak from Africa's perspective.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah. But what I can say in terms of what I'm seeing here in the United States and it's, I think, the same problem that Lesley pointed out is that the animation schools are predominantly even white here in America. It's simply an issue of cost, but what we are starting to see in America are animation schools and animation mentor organizations starting to do more diversity outreach to be more inclusive. They recognize that price is certainly a barrier, and so you're starting to see organizations bend a little bit and provide scholarships to be more diverse and to be more inclusive. So this is kind of really as a result of the George Floyd incident that happened in America, where after that incident, many companies and organizations stood up and said they wanted to be a part of, they wanted to be a positive part in a change agent going forward, so that their organizations are diverse. Now, we'll have to wait and see if the numbers bear out that they're not just all talk, that they're actually, being more inclusive. But there is a window of opportunity that has opened as a result of that incident. And I believe also there is some education within these organizations in North America to reach out to the potential of Africa. I've had recent conversations with a couple of organizations, and they're very interested in knowing what's going on in Africa. Africa is particularly Nigeria and other countries are new frontiers in terms of growth. The United States is very saturated in a lot of ways, and so in order to grow, they have to take into consideration some international expansions. And so I do believe that there is interest, at least that's what's been told to me verbally. It's not...
Lesley, there is a question in the chat for you, which is how can training center in Africa work together to support the development of talent?
Sure, I'll reply to that at the moment. I also want to acknowledge, before I reply to that, Mohammed's other point, just because I looked up my research at the moment and looked at the history of animation in Africa, and he's absolutely right. I discovered, early animation in South Africa dating back to 1916 and Egypt in 1956. So I think, it is true that we are positioning this as a brand new, industry, and in many ways it is. But we have history to build on. Our history has just been lost and undocumented. So we need to reclaim that and work, look at our own cultural preservation by keeping these stories alive. In terms of how training centers in Africa work together, we at Tshimologong, we run a program called Digital Lab Africa. It's a Pan-African incubation program that was convened by Institute of France, and we've taken over the management of it. And essentially, we focus on the categories of animation, gaming, music, digital arts, VR and AR. And in the next step of us growing Digital Lab Africa, we actually want to work with local hubs and incubators and academies around growing this talent. The reason why we want to focus on and work with others to develop multiple smaller ecosystems across the continent is that we only take about 10 winners per annum on Digital Lab Africa. So the projects are pretty high quality. But like this past year, we had about 700 applications and we only took 10. So we're seeing two opportunities. The one is working with ecosystems to mature the talent until they are ready to apply to programs like Digital Africa. The second thing is we saw a lot of incredible talent across the continent that we knew they will succeed without us anyway. So they weren't accepted onto the program. But that is the talent that we need to capture them to help mentor other projects. So there's definitely opportunities we need to work together. We also have Hakageze Festival where we have international residencies. A number of residents across Africa come to South Africa for a month. So please do drop me a link in and I'd be happy to chat further.
And it's today most of the African studio develop a transmedia strategy, like animation, video games, comic, and virtual reality. Do you think this is the right way?
Well, I think it's difficult to be a superstar in multiple spaces. I think that to create something that is a winner, I think it requires all of your attention. And so I feel that, unless you have the financial resources to pull it off, I kind of think in one way, Michael Jordan was really, really great at basketball. He tried baseball, he was not so great. So I make that point to basically say that it takes, lots of hours and lots of time and commitment to be a master at one specific thing. If you have the financial resources to try to be the master at multiple things, then more power to you. But I'm a very big believer that focusing on one vertical and mastering that vertical, and then once you've mastered it and you've gotten you've got a winner, then you can think about maybe moving into other verticals. I mean, Amazon, they started with books. It was a very, intentional vertical that they focused on. And then once they conquered books, then they started to move into to other verticals. So I'm a very big believer in focusing until you have success in one area.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Lesley, you want to add something?
Sure. So I agree with Keith. And for us, animation is core to the creative economy. And we're seeing a lot of studios also working television, film, advertising, video games. And a huge reason for that is sustainability of the sector. They need to look after their livelihoods. So are going to, if you like, to sister industries or sister sectors to bring in the revenue. And the problem when you do that is that your animation intentions, you almost become a hobbyist in your core field that you want to actually grow your skills and build equity. So the more we work together to bring in investment into the sector, the more we can get that specialization that the sector deserves.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is about the diaspora. And can the diaspora play a role in the development of animation in Africa?
I believe so. I mean, the financial resources that could be pulled from the diaspora to support an animation industry in Africa is not to be overlooked. And so, I don't think that one should think only of, what's local or what's in his or her country. I think that with the internet, you have access to the world. The internet, the one beautiful thing about it is that, it has no barriers. And so getting online and networking either through LinkedIn or Instagram, and reaching out to the diaspora to let them know what you're doing, what you're trying to accomplish. I think that you can find a lot of resources. We reached out. When we did AfroAnimation, we didn't have any relationships with studios. I am a media and tech guy, 20 years, but I never focused on animation. I just always thought it was a kid's medium. And then I started coming across a lot of great illustration work on Instagram while we were in the pandemic, and I was just really impressed. And everybody was doing a Zoom conference or a virtual conference online, and I thought, wow, what if we did a conference, a virtual conference for animators of color, Black and brown, and African. And I've worked internationally, so I knew that there had to be animators that were doing great work in Africa as well. And I didn't want it to be just a U.S. North America virtual conference only. I really felt and knew that 50% or 55% of our audience would come from overseas. And so we pulled together a team, and just through Instagram and through Facebook and through LinkedIn, we started reaching out to animators, not only in the U.S., but also in Tanzania, in South Africa, in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Ivory Coast, in Ghana, in the UK, in the Caribbean, in Brazil, wherever we could find them. And I was really impressed. Africa showed up in a big way. A large part of our audience was international. So use the tools that you have in hand online to reach out to folks, to get them interested in what you're doing. The great thing about doing things online is that you don't have to jump on a plane, so you don't have the expense of a plane, you don't have the expense of a hotel, you don't have the expense of the food, and you can get feedback right away whether or not they're interested. So yeah, I do think that the diaspora is a great resource beyond your local government or your national government or other resources within your reach in your country.
It's so nice to hear you speak, Keith, and I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, and I absolutely agree. A couple of years ago, I had a conversation with AfroAnimation in Nigeria, a streaming platform, and they said to me that at that time their highest audience was the Nigerian diaspora living in Dubai. And, I think we forget that there are so many of us that when we live abroad, and I've done my stint living in London as well, where we are hungry for high quality content at home. So I think it's definitely about telling our own stories and remembering that there's our stories on the ground and that it transports around the world. In 2019, I had the privilege of moderating a dialogue in DC between President Barack Obama and Graça Machel around the future of Africa and Nelson Mandela's legacy. And I spent some time there meeting up with a number of diaspora communities, including African American communities, who were hungry to build a relationship with Africans on the ground doing high quality work. And it wasn't just from a charitable space. They really saw the value of even some of their children spending time on the continent, on internships, working here, studying here, and bringing that richness and confidence back home as a young African American. So I think we need to be very strategic on the ground about how we make ourselves available to working with others. And I'm convinced that it's going to take more than animators to grow the animation industry. I'm going to say it again. It's going to take more than animators to grow the animation industry. When I came into the sector not that long ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, many people said, you are not an animator, you don't have the right to speak on certain topics. And I must say that I am proud of the work that we've produced in our academy, working with incredible talent locally and internationally. And we always bring international partners on board to make sure that our work is high quality. I got so passionate about the industry that I'm now finishing my master's degree focusing on the influence of cultural diplomacy on the animation industry. So we need to, I think, be intentional again about, like I said, building this ecosystem and get the right actors on board.
That's something to what Lesley said. I mean, I am not an animator either. I build digital platforms, but when we decided to do AfroAnimation this year, in building, we didn't build the actual platform that we did the conference on, but we obviously did a lot of marketing to bring this vertical together. I don't know if I was considered an outsider, but the impact that conference had and the value exchange that took place was pretty phenomenal. We had almost 1,900 creators from around the world show up, even from the ghettos of Soweto in South Africa. I mean, using the power of technology, but also bringing and forging alliances with organizations and people that are outside of the animation industry should certainly not be a limitation, because as a result of doing the conference and being an app builder, a digital platform builder, what we decided to do, hearing the pain points of animators of color, we decided to launch Afro Plus, which is our answer or a alternative to YouTube, in the sense of animators as well as other creators. We just don't have an animation genre, can also post their creations on Afro Plus in the App Store or the Google Play Store. And we created a monetization model where we share 50-50 in the ad revenue with creators. So all of that has been done within the last 6 or 7 months, from someone that really didn't pay any attention to animation in 20 years, but I'm very excited about the sector. So we've made investments to do what we feel we can do to make a dent in this vertical.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more questions in the chat? I see, Lesley, that you talked with Mohamed about manifesto. If there are any more questions. If there are not, maybe you want to add something before we end this talk?
Sure. I mean, I know that there was going to be a question posed about the African Free Continental Trade Agreement and collaboration across Africa. So maybe I'll just touch on that quickly, if that's okay. I think we have a huge opportunity when you look at the intention of trade across Africa. I certainly would like to see local co-productions. I think that will, number one, strengthen us if we actually work together. Many African countries are quite small, and it only makes sense that we pool our resources to work together, and also leverage the tax incentives that come from co-production across the continent. One thing that saddens me is that we don't have really strong trade policy when it comes to the creative and cultural industries in Africa, and certainly not in South Africa. Despite having multiple co-production agreements, it's not really converting. There is an opportunity that I see, and this maybe links to Mohammed's comment there around the manifesto. I definitely see a role for the African Union to play in strengthening the industry. It's not unusual for various regions in the world to actually deploy animation as a national or regional cultural diplomacy strategy, and we haven't even started, hitting the iceberg. We're thinking about diplomacy and animation locally. And the really value of us thinking about how we want to position ourselves in the rest of the world. But I do think that if we are part of a diplomatic strategy to the AU, that could justify them building more incentives to start investing aggressively, if you like, into the sector, as well as working with governments to create quotas, streaming quotas in television. And again, this is not unique in Africa. And I feel like quite often when we speak about quotas locally, we frown upon it, saying, oh, we're diminishing our own quality. But many nations around the world, if you look at the growth of animation in Asia, if you look at it even in France, like it came down to local quotas. So we need to start consuming our own content, and proudly so that we can start, just creating that foundation to start pushing higher quality. But I think, like I say, we need to strengthen collaboration across the continent, and we need to lobby our governments to work with us in doing so. And maybe then we'll get the private sector to come on board and invest as well, because right now they're seeing it as quite high risky to invest in, where they're uncertain if they're going to get a return on their investment.
Yeah, one thing I would add also is during the pandemic, what we saw here in North America was, while physical productions were shut down, animation kept going. And so folks were working remotely from home. And so that has ignited a renewed interest in investments in animation, because the pandemic affected, physical productions. And so I think that this is a real window of opportunity that the animation space has, not just in North America, but I think also on the continent of Africa. So I certainly agree 100%, 200% with what Lesley said, is that co-production and building alliances are extremely important. You can do that, as I said, just by networking online and developing relationships and partnerships. One story I will say is when I built it was a previous digital platform, it was a marketplace platform. I met a gentleman, he had posted something on LinkedIn from Nigeria, and I wrote him back and said, hey, we're doing something in that area. And so within 3 months or less, I believe it was, he had invested almost $100,000, and I went to Africa, he came to the US. And so, deals get done virtually. So I would encourage anyone listening to this to use the power of online social media to make connections, to ignite opportunities for yourself and your company.
Okay, thank you. So we will need to stop now to prepare the next conference. Thank you for your participation and for the talk. It was really interesting. So I see in the chat that you make some contact with Mohamed, etc. So don't hesitate. And thank you again.